Hey, everybody. Welcome to Exploring Reality. We're going to be doing part two of our review of Stephen Meyer and Joe Rogan talking on the Joe Rogan experience. And if you've noticed, we have another guy here, my friend Zach. I call him my A&E daddy. Uh, he's who I go to just to kind of proof text, proof look at my scripts and my data sometimes when I talk about ancient Near Eastern stuff, because that's what he likes to talk about. Please go check out his YouTube channel. He'll plug it when he introduces himself. Go ahead, Zach.
Sure, awesome. Yeah, so what your pastor didn't tell you, so I interview scholars on ancient Near East, the Bible, theology, topics like hell, atonement, answers in Genesis, stuff like that. It's a lot of stuff we've been doing. So this is a really fun one because I actually had interviews with another scientist on this same review, the same topic of Stephen Meyer and Joe Rogan. So go check out that. But if you like that kind of stuff, then go check out my channel.
Yeah, please go check him out. Really cool stuff. I learned a lot from his channel too. So he has really good interviews with scholars. Yeah, and you guys already know Braxton and the Faithiest Atheist, but just on the off chance people are watching this for the first time, it's part two, and they don't know who you guys are, just go ahead and plug yourselves real quick, and then we'll get rolling.
Sure. I run a channel on YouTube called Trinity Radio, and you can get there with youtube.com/Braxton Hunter. And I'm the president of Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary in Evansville, Indiana. And if you're interested in taking courses there, you can do it 100% online, and you can visit us at trinitysem.edu. My biggest claim to fame is that I was on a previous episode of Exploring Reality.
Go ahead, Richard. I appreciate that, Braxton.
Yeah, hey, I'm the Faithiest Atheist. You can find me on YouTube. I'm sorry, on Facebook. I think I'm the only Faithiest Atheist so far on Facebook. And I do have a YouTube channel, but it's only got a few things on there. So be gentle when you go to my site and see a few pathetic videos. That's something I'm working on. My claim to fame is that I personally met Than earlier this year at an apologetics event, and I'm going to extend that fame when I meet Braxton and Jonathan Pritchett.
There you go.
At another event. And then Zach, I hope one day we can meet as well.
One day.
I'll just throw a conference here in Wisconsin, and we'll get all of you guys together. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right, guys.
I just want to say I have no claim to fame. So
I don't either.
Yes, you have a big guest on your channel, though.
Not as great as Than.
Okay.
Hard to beat.
Real quick, Zach, were you the one that had? I've seen so many shows on Joe Rogan and Steve Meyer. Was your guest like a theist evolution scientist?
Yep.
He was talking about how some of the research that Stephen Meyer presented, especially about sample sizes and stuff like that, he went into how some of that was misleading, or at least Stephen Meyer didn't understand it.
Right. Yeah. He said some good things about Meyer, but yeah, that was definitely part of it. Yeah.
I saw that. That was very good. I like that.
Cool. So you do know me.
Well, yeah.
There you go.
I always listen to shows while I'm walking my dog, and so I don't actually watch it. Just listen. So I didn't recognize you.
Awesome.
Fair enough. Cool. Well, I am gonna pull up the. Hold on. I think I pulled up the wrong thing. Yeah, that's okay. I just pulled up the stream by accident.
We can watch our own show. We can watch.
We can watch our own show and review it. Okay, share system audio. All right. Can you guys hear this? See this?
I can see it.
All right. I wasn't going to put the video up because of what happened last time. And what I'm going to do actually is make it play a little bit faster. Is there a way I can do that?
Yeah, you did it last time.
I did? Okay.
You either went to 1.5 or 2 point, because I was listening to it on double speed, and when you went double speed, it was too fast.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to play it and see what happens, and then we'll kind of go from there. Zach, same thing as last time. If you watched our stream last time, just tell me to pause when you got something to say.
Okay.
That is not what I wanted to do. That was my kids' playlist.
Let's review that.
Well, that's what. That's exactly what I'm saying, that religious belief system overrode the intuition that they would normally have based on the underlying moral principle.
Why do they have that religious belief system? If God is going to present religious beliefs, if God is going to somehow or another come down and give wisdom to men, why do some have this very fucked up version of it?
Yeah, I can't answer that. There's a multiplicity of systems of belief. What I have tried to do is argue for a theistic belief system that I think makes sense. I think it gives a good account of this objective morality, but also I think there's scientific evidence for it, and that's what my work has been about. I'm not a sociologist of religion, so I don't know exactly how all these different variants arose, but some of them have had these destructive sort of consequences where people have, against their deeper intuitions, overridden them because they have this belief that they got to do this, make the crops come in, or to.
Right.
Really quick, Richard, I just remembered you said you mentioned that you have some notes you wanted to go over too.
And especially right here, we stopped right here when they were talking about this, and this is kind of an ongoing theme between Joe and Stephen. It was where Joe will say, "Well, what about all these awful things? How did that even get here?" And Stephen Meyer, he says he doesn't know, but he also says, "But look at all this amazing stuff, and how did this get here?" And that's just kind of an ongoing theme between them, for 3 hours. And I just wanted to bring that up. I think that's really important because I think a lot of theists focus on the good stuff, and then a lot of atheists that the bad guys over on my side are focusing only on the bad stuff. It's hard to find people that will embrace both. It's like, okay, there's enough complexity, there's amazing, but there's enough devastation that it's hard to believe that one person's in charge and has a plan.
I gotcha.
Yeah, and I think a good thing to say about that is it might strike some who have kind of an awareness of theistic arguments for God's existence, and atheistic arguments. They might think, well, it was kind of weird for Joe Rogan to go from we're talking about a design argument to suddenly talking about the problem of evil. But it's actually I don't know how Rogan came to make this move, but it's actually not a strange move. If you're going to make the point, kind of like Richard just said, that, hey, look, because remember, teleological arguments at base are showing that there's some purpose, some purpose to this, some teleology, some design. And so if you're going to say on the basis of all of this, specified complexity, an intelligent design person might say that there must be a God, well, then you've got to explain why some of it looks, like a God wouldn't have done this. And so I think it's a fair move to make. Now, just on the heels of what Richard did say, of course, Meyer did toss out very briefly a free will theodicy of sorts or defense. But you're right, he didn't say too much beyond that.
Yeah. Zach, you got anything to say on it?
Oh, I like this side of the topic because you get into like sociology and like why people leave the faith as well. Because if you spend your entire life talking about only the good things about Christianity and never talk about the bad, and then like one thing happens and like, there's all different reasons to all this conversation of like why people leave Christianity, but like that can hit you like a ton of bricks, like just coming over and over and over about like issues with like problem and evil, stuff like that. So like, sure, Meyer's job here is not to give you all the reasons why you shouldn't be a Christian, but he's trying to give you the reasons why you should be a Christian on this video. But at the same time, you do have to talk about the bad things. So that's
be honest.
And that's a good point. And that's one of those things that even Christians who have no idea what apologetics is, don't ever talk to atheists. They just go to church on, even the little old church lady or the little old church man, to be equal opportunity there. They're gonna think of this on their own. They're gonna wonder when bad things happen in their lives, why would God allow this to happen to me, or why would God allow this to happen to somebody else? And so they're going to come to it on their own, even if an atheist doesn't present it. So I think it's one of the more important things for Christian thinkers and Christian defenders to know how to talk about, at least at a basic level, because church people will encounter it, even just thinking through things on their own. I bet Richard, when he was a Christian, was already thinking about the problem of evil long before he got into Christian philosophy and stuff like that.
Yeah. And if my church didn't want to talk to me about it, and they were a great church, I mentioned this in the last video, it's a great church and they meant well, but they weren't trained to, they were trained to kind of say, stop asking questions. You get one or two and that's it. But if they don't want to talk to me about it and I start to realize they're uncomfortable, then who does that leave? That leaves the secular world to rush in and answer those questions.
The enemies.
Yes. So keep that in mind. The bad guys are out there waiting to have those conversations if you're not.
Yeah. I will say, I am a little underwhelmed with the way that Stephen Meyer handles the problem of evil within this dialogue. Because if you're going to put up, at least this is a hot take, I guess, but like if you're going to be putting up some sort of a teleological argument, and especially because Stephen Meyer is a Bayesian, I think that you should be putting out an argument that at least mitigates the evidential hit of this teleology in your argument, or do something like what other philosophers of religion have done, or philosophers of science has done, where you can actually outline an expectation of this teleology in some way, shape, or form, where you're actually going to expect things that can lead to suffering given Christian theism. And that would be like an entailment based off theodicy or something like that. And so I don't know if Stephen Meyer didn't go that route just because he's on Joe Rogan's podcast and he didn't want to get as technical as he was. But even then, I think that there could have been a better way to go about that. And so I don't know if anybody has anything to say about
the only other thing I would say about that is one of the ways someone can be persuaded away from the force of an argument from evil would be to show a theistic argument that is just powerful enough that it overcomes in their own thinking the force of the. I mean, in the book, The Evidential Argument from Evil, edited by Daniel Howard Snyder, which is a collection of essays from various people. One of them, I used to think, I thought it was Draper, but I looked and I couldn't find that it was him. But someone was pointing out that, hey, look, if you have a theistic argument that is successful, or that you judge to be successful, well, that's it. You may still, as a believer in your faith tradition, have to come to some explanation about evil. But in terms of persuading you to believe that there's a God, if there's a theistic argument that demonstrates to you that there's a God on some meaning of demonstrate, it persuades you. Well, then you may not have an answer to the argument from evil yet, but you may still be persuaded. And maybe something like that is what maybe Meyer's thinking. Look, if I can just present a powerful enough design argument here, then he'll have somebody else on to talk about the problem of evil or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying, like, I don't know exactly what's going through his head there. And I think it was William Rowe, that said that, by the way, Braxton, but I could be wrong there.
Well, Rowe has the famous an evidential argument from evil in some varieties of atheism, the famous journal article, and maybe that's where I got it from. I don't know.
I don't remember. All right, so you said they go on this for a while, Richard. Is it worth just fast forwarding somewhere, or should we just keep going?
Honestly, I thought about that. I re-listened to it yesterday, and there's not really a time to just skip ahead. We kind of just have to go through it because there's a lot of back and forth and stuff worth talking about.
Sounds good. Just tell me when to stop.
All right. I know that's not necessarily a field of study, but it's still somehow or another these things are all intertwined in this idea. Sure. Yeah. So.
Yeah, in making the argument that I'm making, I'm not claiming to have answered all the other imponderables. Of course, of course. Yeah.
No, look, it's a fascinating conversation. It's a fascinating thought.
Already it is. Yeah.
But I mean, even just the thought of something that is either intelligent or is code that is interwoven into the entire universe itself. I have a question. When we think of human beings, we always think of human beings.
That's an awesome thing you just said, actually. I mean, I was talking to my colleague David Berlinski about that very issue this morning. How it's not just the biologists, but the physicists are now thinking of the foundational reality as being informational. And I mean, we found that we've located, we know the locus or the place where the code is stored in a living organism. That's an unbelievable discovery. Right. For 2,000, 4,000 years, however long humans have thought about these things, at least back to the time of Aristotle, we've had this mystery. Why does like beget like? Why are children discernibly like their parents? Why? And in 1953.
So something I wanted to just pause there for a second is, I don't know about code in biology, but at least code that he's talking about, like when the fundamental universe and all this other stuff, I think he's referencing what like theoretical physicists are talking about when it comes to like quantum field theory, and especially with just like the Nobel Peace Prize that came out where somebody proved that material reality doesn't actually exist, right? So I think that's what he's referencing, but I'm not getting the connection that he's making there between that and like information in biology. Does anybody else know what he's saying there?
Well, you skipped into the conversation. Go ahead, Richard. He's listened to it 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, okay. I want to say he doesn't really get into like information within the cosmos. He's kind of sticks within biology.
Okay.
I do think information within the cosmos is worth talking about. I mean, I guess photons have information.
So yeah, Richard, I was thinking just being dropped into this part of the conversation and it being a couple of weeks since I really digested it, I was thinking he was just kind of making a point about just a general point about, hey, we're going to talk about code and information, but man, information is more ubiquitous than perhaps you think. Even some physicists postulate that maybe if we could get past all of the, fundamental particles, we might get to information. Information on, and that would, you're right, that does open up a really interesting discussion, whether we want to go there or not, because then you get into, is idealism true? What exactly is some kind of idealism true? It is interesting.
Yeah, I'm actually rethinking my idealism at the moment, but that's not related to this. Okay, that's good to know. I paused it there because this is still a blind reaction for me. I've purposely not listened to this so that way, this is just initial thoughts kind of thing. Zach, you good? Do you have anything to say?
I was just saying that, Than, you should be so more prepared than us, but we're getting your special reaction.
It's special, yes.
3 through 65, we have this amazing flurry of scientific activity that elucidates the source of the signal that ensures that transmission of hereditary information. And we discovered there actually is a code that is responsible for that phenomenon. We now talk about DNA replication and gene expression, two different things the DNA molecule does. So to me, that's a stop press moment in the history of science and the history of biology, but in the history of humankind. So, this suddenly we have an inkling of how this happens. So
what I was going to say is that a human being, we think of them as an individual, but really they're a host for a lot of organisms. The human being does not exist without the bacteria in its gut. The human being does not exist without the flora on its skin. And the human being is filled with billions of other living things, right?
Right.
When we think of the earth, we think of the earth as a host for, billions of life forms, insects and amoebas and plants and animals and all that. When we look at the planet itself, we think of the planet as an individual. But when we look at a galaxy, a spiral galaxy, we look at that as an individual. We look at that as a thing. When we look at the universe, when we look at God, are we making a mistake by thinking that it's something that created the universe, that maybe the universe itself is this living thing? The universe itself is God.
Well, that's an absolutely great question. There are 3 basic views about this. One is that the universe is itself, the physical universe, is eternal and self-existent. And some people think of it as a kind of organism. There was this Gaia hypothesis that Lynn Margulis. Most standard materialists just think of it as the product of matter and eternally existent or self-existent matter and energy, or the physical fields that are expressed in material particles. They think of those as eternal and self-existent. The other view is a more pantheistic view, that there is a kind of God, but it's not an agent or a conscious mind that to whom you could pray or with whom you could communicate or who has communicated or created, but rather it sort of pervades the physical universe and it is also eternal and self-existent. And then the third view is that there is a transcendent creator beyond the universe who brought the physical universe into existence.
And who brought him into existence, or her, or it, or they?
Just to finish the other thought, and then I'll come back to that. Yeah. The third view is the view that I hold. I'm a classical theist, and I think
I was expecting that "who created God" comment at some point.
I mean, that's the end of the debate, right? The end of the discussion.
Yeah, right.
The scientific evidence is pointing in that direction fairly strongly, in part because we now have evidence from multiple lines of evidence suggesting that the universe did in fact have a beginning. The material universe does not look to have been eternal and self-existent. And so then to answer your second question, I would say that every philosophical system, sometimes philosophers talk about worldviews, whether they're formal philosophical systems are just sort of the informal set of assumptions that we all need to make about reality. But every worldview needs to answer the question, what is the thing or the process or the entity from which everything else came? What's the ground of being, the starting point? And up until the 20th century,
Go ahead, Richard.
I was just going to say, if I remember correctly, they start getting into the beginning of the universe, and they talk about this for a long time. Okay. And if we're going to talk about code and the genes, I just want to bring up one thing, just from my following this sort of stuff, since the 80s, is that there's been a lot of back and forth on science between non-theists and atheists, where there was scientists who said, back in the 30s, they were like, we're never going to understand the gene. And there was one scientist, I think it's Charles Singer, back in 1930, and he was like, you'll never be able to compare the gene to a computer code because the gene is far more complex. It's more mysterious than a computer code. It's God's work. And, I don't know if he said God. He might have said life. There's a force of life, I forget Charles Singer's theology. But Richard Dawkins took that for action, and he wrote a whole book about And it wasn't just on Charles Singer. There was apologists and Christians in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s saying, listen to what the scientists said about how, the gene's never going to be like a computer code, not realizing that had been solved in the 50s. And so Richard Dawkins wrote this whole book about, it's exactly like a code. And in Richard Dawkins' mind, he was given like his atheist testimony. He was like, I thought I put it to bed. I thought that was a kill shot and that, Christians were going to go home. But then people like Stephen Meyer was like, oh, look at this. Richard Dawkins is saying it's a code. So so it's almost like there's a gap. And I hate, I don't mean God of the gaps like a insult. There's a gap that we don't understand. And sometimes theists say, well, this mysterious force goes here. And then we figure out what that is. And then maybe atheists celebrate and they're like, woo, Christianity's over. But then Christians can go, isn't it amazing that it can be like that? And so it kind of goes from gap to fine tuning. And I think Stephen Meyer was one of the first people to take that approach to say, now that we do know, that's an example of fine tuning. And it's a different approach using the scientific information. And then I wanted to offer that now he's about to get into the beginning of the universe and there's things that we don't know. And he's kind of doing the gap thing. He's saying, well, the points this way. So I'm thinking intelligent designer.
Yeah, it's tough because Richard, you and I were talking the other day, and I kind of told you, like, I don't really know how probative, at least I find, the beginning of the universe to be for the theism versus atheism debate. Specifically because I think both sides can make sense of either model of reality.
Yes.
And so it's like,
that's exactly how I see it. A beginning or not, I think atheists and theists won't budge. They'll change their arguments, but the atheists will stay atheists and the theists will stay theists. Well, give or take.
Yeah, and changing your arguments isn't a bad thing either, right? Like that's just standard science.
Yeah, okay. I'm okay with that too. I'm just saying he always talks about theistic implications with this beginning thing, and I think an eternal universe also has theistic implications. So for me, it doesn't knock me over the way I think he wants it to knock me over.
Yeah, you guys got anything to say, Zach? Brax?
Yeah, so I think I'm glad to see that Richard's pushing a little bit here and making a good point about, it seems like you Christians, whatever comes out in the end, or you theists, let's say, you're gonna find a way to use that, and or at least that has happened in the past, and I think that is a fair criticism. And in this case, what I would say is, if it is the case that we have this kind of code, this genetic code, and this RNA that copies the DNA, and then you have these protein molecules that get made that do these different things from different shapes and all that, and you have this Gattaca sort of thing. Whatever the reason was that Christians or theists came to the conclusion that that's good for us, is an interesting question, but somewhat independent from, is that good for us? In fact, and I think the notion that we're saying there is a designer, there is a creator, and he designed the universe to be finely tuned for life and all those sorts of things, to then get an information system that can even be roughly called an information system like that with these characters and things. I think that is, rather than what you're putting isn't really a God of the gap sort of thing to us, but it seems like positive evidence to think there's an intelligence rather than we don't know, so we're going to say there's an intelligence there with that.
Yeah, I don't mean it. I was just going to say real quick thing. I don't mean it as a defeater. I actually just think it's a pattern, and I just think that no matter what, there's so much amazing things that you'll always be able to say that maybe God is the reason why it's like that. And for me, that doesn't bother me because I'm more of a diplomat than I am an anti-Christian. But I'm just saying, sometimes we get so angry, and some apologists get so angry about you're trying to avoid a beginning, and an atheist just like, there's no evidence for a beginning. And I'm trying to say, it doesn't really matter. Either way, you can still make a case. You can still say it's amazing. So I don't really mean to say that as you guys are just going to find a way. I just think it's a pattern.
I'm eager to disagree with you, Richard, so I'm trying to drum it up, I guess.
All right.
That's funny. I think Richard, what you're saying highlights the importance of methodology when it comes to argumentation, right? Yeah. Like it would be a God of the gaps, just be like, here's a gap in our scientific, here's a gap in our scientific knowledge with regards to natural laws, right? Mm-hmm. and insert God there, that would be a God of the gaps fallacy. But then pointing to like fundamental reality and saying, hey, this is the best explanation of what we have given the data, that's not a God of the gaps fallacy. But you're not saying that either. I'm just kind of pointing
I
something
actually
out.
think that's better. I think every time we come up with a scientific discovery, some theists are going to fight against it and say it's deep state lying, and some other theists are going to embrace it and use it for fine tuning. And I think that fine tuning is a much better approach, and you'll always have fine tuning, even if aliens from another dimension come and show us exactly how to build consciousness and how to build universes and how to build life and how to fine tune universes. Theists will be like, this is amazing. They've just shown us all the evidence we need that the creator is out there.
You're darn right, Richard.
Right. And I don't mean that as a critique. It's still going to be amazing.
Just, yeah.
So answers aren't the enemy. And I think sometimes theists worry that answers might be an enemy. And they try to get a commitment too soon.
Yeah.
Also, one more thing I want to say about this, as atheists, we have the same gaps. So if you ask an atheist about some of this stuff, we'll say emergence or complexity or something like that, where we can't walk you through emergence or complexity either. So we all have the same gap. So
and
100%.
not to get us back into last week, but to kind of bridge the gap from last week. That is at the end what we were kind of saying about what Joe Rogan does. Not that he's like a philosopher or a scientist or anything, but he did often say throughout this thing, well, yeah, that may be the best explanation now, but I don't know if he actually said that, but
he did. He said for now, he said that several times.
Yeah. Later on, maybe there's a bigger science, a new scientific discovery, a new character is going to come on the scene and articulate this better, or we're going to make some discovery and find out the answer. So that can be like a naturalism of the gaps, is how we often term that.
Absolutely. And I'm like that. That's my religion exactly, is that maybe someday we're going to discover it.
Yeah. That's one of the big things that I get when I talk about like the argument from psychophysical harmony. People punt to evolution to explain psychophysical harmony, and I'm like, well, that's the whole entire point. What explains the evolutionary laws that led to psychophysical harmony? Okay, before we get started again, just wanted to point this out. I've been made fun of for this a lot lately, and I don't know why I do this. So I will, if it bothers you. Too bad, Cosmo. I'm gonna stare into the soul of reality as I think still. Okay, and then Kevin, my boy over here, brought up something that I say all the time too when it comes to some of Meyer's arguments, which is just I've never understood what code is supposed to mean when we say DNA is code. DNA is a double helix pattern of molecules linked together, rather different from computer code. Does Meyer go into that during this, or go ahead, Richard?
I don't remember how deeply he gets into it, but I think the best book for saying that it's a code is from Richard Dawkins' book River from Eden. He gets into it a lot, and if you don't want to read
River Out of Eden, I think
River Out of Eden, he really gets into it to say why he calls it a code, and why even Stephen Meyer calls it a code. I know it's in Return of the God Hypothesis, the book. I just don't remember where.
Yeah, I'll have to go check it out. I have the book and I read it, but it's been a while.
It's funny because he got into that whole thing, and I had mentioned it on Trinity Radio, and then I incidentally ended up having a telephone conversation, a private telephone conversation with T-Jump, and he was telling me, no, it's not a code. That's not even the right way to talk about it and all that. So I had Jonathan McClatchy on, who's got a degree in, I think, evolutionary biology. And I said, is it a code or not? He's like, of course it's a code. We talk about it being a code. And, so I was actually going to raise this to you guys who might know more about the scientific apologetics than I do, specifically Richard, to how I'm having a hard time even understanding what the concern is here, because what we do have in the DNA double helix is different configurations of Gattaca, the GATC. We have different arrangements that result in different functions, not unlike how the numbers in a computer code result in different things.
Exactly.
So to call it a code, if we mean by a code, this is an equation or arrangement of information that could only come from a designer, which is ultimately the point that we'll want to make with something like this. Right. Well, then of course the atheist isn't going to agree with that. But if we just mean by a code a series of quote unquote character-like things that result in certain functions, how is it not that?
Right. I
Yeah.
completely agree with that. There's so much contentiousness, I think, in these debates that sometimes an atheist might be on a conversation and you might say, well, you atheists don't like, such and such a movie. And he'll say, oh, we love that movie because he just wants to fight. So I think like fighting code is that contentiousness. Because I think Richard Dawkins spells it out pretty clearly that it acts
Yeah.
just like the code.
My issue, I think my issue, prima facie, like at least from what I remember, was it seems like code is also synonymous, or it's something that carries what they want to say is information, and then like that kind of opens up the question, like, what is information? And it just seems like it seems like you have to deal with a lot of contentious topics here, to the point that, and it might just be the fact that I'm probably like one of the most annoying apologists out there, because there's so many arguments I don't like and there's very few that I do like. I don't know what it is.
Is
it's
this
just,
what Richard, not to break up your flow, but is
Yeah.
this what he calls or is referred to as Shannon information? This notion that you have. So I remember this analogy from the book, Richard, where he's talking about how when you fax something, for those that remember what or know what faxing is, when you write something on a piece of paper, like a sentence in handwritten, and you fax it, what comes out from, let's say, Washington, D.C. to California, when they fax something in California, what you're getting, you're not getting anything. That when the person reads that, what passed from one place to the other? Well, some electrical signals passed, an image passed, however that works. But what's important to the person is this isn't the same ink, this isn't the same paper, this isn't the same scratch that he literally made, but information has passed in that time.
Exactly
and
right.
that, I think, was the sense in which, or am I right, that that's the sense in which these arrangements are information?
Yeah, and instructions. Even more importantly, instructions. So if that fax said push the button, then that's going to change things. And so yeah, it's not just information; it's instructions. And that's what these ACTG. That's what they do. Is they're like, you're going to be a frog's leg, or you're going to repair a frog's leg.
Yeah, it seems to me like you could only say it's information on the condition that theism is true. Right. So it might be the fact that maybe, like, as a deductive proof, I don't know how I feel about this, but like maybe you could say it's information if it's like in a more Bayesian sense, where it's like, hey, on the condition that theism is true, we can make sense of this, because this would be information for what to do, because information precludes like a mind.
Well, this is the distinction I was trying to draw a minute ago, and you might be right in terms of how this is discussed, because I like I say, I'm not into the scientific apologetic stuff very much.
Yeah.
But if one means to entail that it had the only explanation, if we call it information, that means designer, then yeah, I wouldn't think an atheist would grant that, but I would think that an atheist could grant this much, and maybe this is to put it even softer than calling it a code, is to say, look, this particular arrangement, this is meaningful in the sense that if you plug it in, X will happen. And so it's meaningful in that way. And meaningful, I guess, still gets at information, but I don't know.
Well, and then there's like, there's an atheist scientist that's making the rounds on YouTube right now called Michael Levin. And I hope we can, not this time, but I hope then one day we can have.
Yeah. When I do get to reading about that, I want to have you on to talk about it, because.
But he definitely says there's goals and there's decision making in these cells, and there's no neurology. They're not even neurons yet, but they're behaving as if they have goals, and they're making decisions. In that, if you muddle with them, they're going to work around that and still get to the goal that they were trying to reach. So they can prove that they have goals and that they're making decisions, even though they're not doing it in the way that we think. So theists, some theists don't like it because they can't show that the DNA is doing that. They don't know where it's coming from. But some theists also don't like it is because cancer does that too. Cancer also has a goal, and it's also decision making. But then some atheists don't like it because you can't say this leads to this, and there's a sequence of steps that are natural. It's a sort of it looks like decision making, and so neither atheists nor theists are happy with this. But it's a part of nature.
Zach, you got anything you want to say? You've been quiet for a while.
No, not really. Back to what Richard was saying earlier, though. It's interesting because all this discussion about like code and stuff like that, and if you do end up concluding that it's evolution, someone like Dr. Ardern might even point to like, hey, this is evidence for God, and he's gone into that on different videos. So
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
exactly, perfect example.
Yeah, and that's you're saying that's a perfect example of Richard's point that whatever we end up discovering, that's going to be evidence for my position, whatever my position
Right.
is.
And then atheists should be okay with that. If we discover something amazing and someone says, "Man, I have to think God, designed it that way," I think atheists should be like, "Okay, I don't think we should be angry about that."
Yeah,
All right. You guys ready to get going again?
sure.
Cool.
I think the materialist naturalist view was very credible because it affirmed that matter and energy were eternal and self-existent in the same way that theists thought God was eternal and self-existent. But in both systems, or in all systems, something is what philosophers call the primitive, the thing from which everything else comes. I think in as a consequence, or in the wake of our modern cosmological, astrophysical discoveries that the material universe itself had a beginning, that matter and energy is now a poor candidate to be that eternal self-existent thing. And therefore, I think that the theistic view that a transcendent creator is the thing from which everything else came, without itself being created, is the best place to start our philosophical thinking. It provides the best explanation for what we see.
When you say that there's direct evidence that the universe has a beginning, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's a fascinating story, and when I tell in the new book, Return to God Hypothesis, there are basically three different lines of evidence. There's three different classes of evidence, if you will. There's the evidence from observational astronomy. Maybe we should just start there, and I'll tell you about the stuff from theoretical physics.
Just for 30 minutes.
Flopping off my head.
Sorry, you can adjust them. They push in.
Yeah. Okay.
Here
we go.
Brian Simpson was here. He's got a big head.
That's awesome. Well, it's an unbelievable. It's another one of these. I think maybe part of my story is that I was always fascinated with these issues at the intersection of science and philosophy, where the scientific evidence leads you to a big philosophical question or possibly conclusion. So back to the ancient Greeks, we've had this debate: is the universe eternal and self-existent? Has it always been here, or is it finite? Did it come into existence at a point in time? In which case, was there possibly an external creator that brought it into existence? In the 1920s, we get the first scientific evidence that helps us to answer that question. Coming into the 20th century, most physicists assume that the universe is eternal. It's infinite it's past eternal. You can go back as far as you want. There's always matter, there's always energy, there's always space, there's always time. In the 1920s, Edwin Hubble is at Mount Wilson in Southern California, the big observatory there. He's a lawyer who's come into astronomy at a very propitious time because the astronomers have just started building these great dome telescopes. And they've also been developing photographic technology that allows them to collect a lot more light over a long period of time. He starts looking at the distant galaxies. No, actually, well, they were nebula. They didn't know whether they were galaxies or not. And there was a debate right up to 1920 whether or not the Milky Way in which we live is the only galaxy, or whether these little smudges that they were detecting on the photographic plates, a little dot of light with smudges, whether those were other galaxies or just a star with gas around it. And Hubble was able to use some new techniques for measuring distances to distant astronomical objects, in particular to these nebula. And he found that the distance to the Andromeda Nebula was measured at 900,000 light years, but the accepted measurement for the distance across the Milky Way was only 300,000 light years. So clearly the Milky Way could not contain the Andromeda Nebula. So therefore the Andromeda Nebula wasn't just a nebula, it was another galaxy. And in the ensuing years, then, as he uses the big telescopes and these new techniques, he establishes that there are galaxies galore, spiral galaxies, spindle nebula galaxies. So we now know, I think I put in the book, I used the number 200 billion galaxies. I think I've since corrected that it's another order of magnitude, that astronomers now think there's 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. It's just unbelievable how much our awareness of the vastness of the universe has expanded in really 100 years. It's amazing. Right. But the second thing that Hubble discovered is the light coming from those distant galaxies is being stretched out. If you shine light through a prism, it separates into the colors red to violet. And the red light, it corresponds to light with longer wavelengths. And what he's detecting is light that has shifted in these spectral analyses that they do in the red direction, suggesting that its wavelengths are longer, as you would expect if those galactic objects are receding away from us, if they're moving away. So it's like the Doppler effect with the train whistle. If the train's moving away, the pitch of the sound goes down. And that's because the sound waves are being stretched out. The same thing happens with light. And so very early on, as he's studying the galaxies, he's realizing that there's not just a lot of them, and they're not just separate from our galaxy, but they're moving away from us. And in fact, the further out they are, the faster they're moving away. And so that gives rise to the idea of an expanding universe, because to explain that observation, you have to posit something like a roughly spherical expansion of the whole to account for that, what's called the Hubble relationship, that the further out, the faster they're going. And so that's big discovery number 2 for Hubble. First, there are other galaxies. Secondly, they're moving away from us. And that's suggesting that the universe as a whole is expanding. Now, as you wind that picture of the universe backwards in time, if in your mind's eye you think of, they call it back extrapolating, what the universe would have been like 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or a million, or a billion, however old the universe ends up being, eventually all that galactic material would have converged to a common point past which you cannot back extrapolate. So that point then marks the beginning of the expansion of the universe, but arguably the beginning of the universe itself. And so that's arguably. Now I think there are other developments.
Can I
Yeah,
pause
go ahead.
right
Oh
there?
yeah, that's again another long explanation.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 1920,
Right.
Now imagine the detection ability that we might have 500 years from now. Maybe this information is not the big picture. Maybe there's a lot more to be discovered with advancement of science and astronomy as they can develop methods to look deeper and deeper into the galaxy. I mean, aren't we finding some things with the James Webb telescope that are leading some scientists to question the actual age of the universe itself?
It's very. I was going to talk about James Webb after you started the question, but it's the James Webb I think has provided. First of all,
there is some debate though now about the timeline.
Well, the debate, as I understand it, let me answer the first part of the question, and that is, of course.
So I don't know where they're going to go with this.
I do. They're going to spend 30 minutes on this, so we might as well stop as much as we want to.
Okay. Well, okay. So I don't know if this is going to be. I want to say something, but I don't know if they're going to talk about it or not. But so I'll just kind of say it, and then if they are going to talk about it, we can stop me. I don't know that you can talk about the expansion of the universe as something that gets you to the beginning of the universe, because at best it gets you to an initial expansion point.
Right.
I don't know that it gets you to creatio ex nihilo.
Right.
But I don't know if Stephen's going that direction or not either.
No, he doesn't.
He does say this is provisional, and he says there could be more data that shows more later, but he just says right now this is the trend line. But I agree with you. We definitely can get to a point where we see like what seems to be the introduction of matter and energy and the space-time fabric and the physical laws. But does that mean there was nothing there before there, or could there have been something like that, but not that before then? And was before even a thing? Because once you have time zero, then do you even have a before? So that's why they say our laws of math and logic break down. And it's not nothing. It's a question mark. And I know a lot of atheists have said nothing. They was like, this came from nothing, but it's really just a question mark. This came from I don't know. And
Yeah.
nobody knows what nothing looks like. You can say without matter and energy, but that doesn't get you to nothing. It just gets you without matter and energy.
Yeah. For this topic, because I just talked about this with a philosopher named Ryan Mullins. Mullins and I were talking about this in a different stream just last week. So if anybody wants to like just learn about that a little bit more, I recommend going back to that stream. We got a little technical with the science there, but I think it's important stuff. Because like you said, Richard, like our laws of nature kind of break down. The laws of physics kind of break down at this point. And again, it doesn't get you to creatio ex nihilo. It just gets you to like an initial expansion point.
And the introduction of things, but just the things that we know about.
Even that, right? I don't know that it actually gets you to the introduction of space, time, and matter, because you could just say like everything was condensed into that singularity. Right. So like Graham Oppy might say something like this is the initial conditions, or like the or something like that. Right. And so there's things you could say there, and there's tons of philosophy of time stuff being done and physics of time stuff being done that can make sense of this. I think when it comes down to the science, people are trying to find like a working theory of quantum gravity that can make sense of the singularity. And if we get that, then I think Big Bang cosmology, again, doesn't really support theism or atheism. Right. It's just, I don't know, but they're going to keep talking about this, he said, so.
He does really defend Big Bang, and I really think that's the key to his ministry in this, especially for this particular book. And if they were to disprove Big Bang, I bet you that Stephen Meyer would be one of those theists who spends a few years fighting it and saying, this could be deceptive. We need to look into it. And in the meantime, there'll be other theists who will take that model and say, look how amazing this is, and tell me that God didn't.
Yeah, I'd be the latter option, just being like, oh, okay, well, here's how the science fits with theology, because my project is here's a bunch of models of Christian theism that you can make sense of given what we have.
Right. And again, I'm not critiquing, but I just think Stephen Meyer's ministry will kind of turn into Ken Ham, and that people will say, oh yeah, I remember 10 years ago when people looked up to him and thought that he was onto something. I think he's so in love with Big Bang that he doesn't know what to do if it gets disproven. And if it gets disproven for me as an atheist, I'll just be amazed that there's new science.
What about you, Zach or Brax?
Yeah, so it's my understanding that, like, specifically, I remember this on like Cameron Bertuzzi's channel, where you get in onto all this science, and then at the end of the day, it comes back to the philosophy, and there's like 1,000 different arguments for philosophy.
Yeah.
And that debate with I think it was, I can't even remember who it was, but
Rationality rules.
yeah. So in that debate, like, it was almost always philosophy was the topic, because the science, that was, or more contentious, I guess, or is that the
Yeah.
reason why they're not talking about it as much?
Yeah. So by my lights, it seems to me like the science has to be interpreted, and then the scientific data, at the end of the day, has to be interpreted through the lens of philosophy, especially once you're getting to the like fundamental reality, right? Like if this singularity is like the stopping point of material reality, however you want to phrase that, you have to talk about philosophy at that point, because it's beyond the scope of measurement, right? So that's why I think it has more to do with philosophy than it does science at that point. If that's what you're asking, unless I misunderstood what you're saying.
Yep, that's it.
I think that can even mess with our philosophy, because I see like contingency and necessity as the same problem as what we're talking about. Because if we get the time equals 0 and we don't have cause and effect, then I think contingency and necessity don't really work as well.
This is where I'll plug my contingency argument stage 1 video for you, Richard. Because I actually think so. Because the contingency argument actually, for it to be successful and for you to get to this necessary being, whatever that necessary being is, you could have an eternal, infinite chain of contingent objects, right? And you could still need a necessary thing to make sense of those objects. Because I can still ask, like, for example, let's just say I have an infinitely long chain of cats, and they're all contingent objects, right? And I could still ask the question, like, well, why do we have this infinite chain of cats instead of this infinite chain of dogs or cats, right? Like, it still calls out for an explanation, because these cats are not the types of things that can exist without some sort of explanation, even if it is an infinite chain.
And see, that's where I worry that like our mindset is so fixated on cause and effect that we can't fathom, unless that's the case, we can't fathom anything except that there must be an ultimate source somewhere. But just because we can't fathom it doesn't mean that that's reality.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I was correct between like Kalam style arguments and contingency arguments. Go ahead, Braxton.
Yeah. So could it be that if we ran the tape back and got down to this singularity, that wasn't the actual beginning, that maybe that was there for a long time, just in that state? We're using the term time. That was there for a long time, just as one singular point. Or what most people would want to do with this, I think, to deal with the fine tuning would be, because one of the problems is we've got to up the likelihood that we would get fine tuning like this, right? That was on this level, that the universe should be fine tuned for life. So you have a couple of ways you could go with that involve other universes that typically come up at this point. And one of those things is an oscillating model, where rather than having a multiverse with a lot of different universes or an infinite number of different universes, you have an oscillating model or a big crunch model where it's coming back. Dawkins suggests this in his God Delusion book that's so famous. The problem with that is my understanding, and again, I'm not a science guy, but there are Joseph Silk has this book, The Big Bang, from 1989, and he tries to show that if that's the case, for various reasons, you couldn't have had more than 100 universes on an oscillating or big crunch model. And the problem there is that's not nearly enough for the sort of fine tuning that we're trying to get to, where we have a lot. Now, whether that's correct or not, I'm not a scientist, but another way to go is, well, maybe there's a multiverse, but we've got to have a way to get the multiverse off the ground. Maybe there are these baby universes that are born in black holes. That was something that Stephen Hawking and Lee Smolin were both working on. And Hawking came out and said, there's no baby universes coming out. So I think we're just talking about beginning here and what comes before and what does the expansion mean. But I think the importance of this for the type of conversation that we're going to want to have is, what does that do for us in terms of the argument? Now, maybe if you're trying to push some sort of a cosmological argument, that would be one thing. But in these fine tuning waters, you can't just have a singularity infinitely into the past or something. If you're wanting to up the likelihood of getting more complex life, I guess, or life.
Yeah.
Yeah, they get into a lot of this. I don't think he gets into the oscillating thing, but he does talk about multiverses and a couple of other alternate theories.
It's been a couple of weeks, and I've forgotten what they covered.
Right. Yeah, I've listened a few times just because I've really appreciated both of them. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm kind of with you that if we were to discover multiverses exist, I would just be like I mentioned last week when my 4-year-old, at the time she's 13 now, but when she was 4 and she said, "Look at all this stuff," and I thought that was persuasive. She was just talking about reality. I would just say, "There's more stuff." If there's a multiverse with every possible scenario, I'd be, "Oh my gosh, look at all this stuff." You know, I might become even more likely to consider theism.
And like what you said, Richard, before about like, what if there were aliens and all that would just kind of push the problem back. Right. I see that with a multiverse. I get that an infinite number of actual universes, or at least a ridiculously high number of actual universes, increases the likelihood you get one that's life permitting. But then I would just switch over to a cosmological argument and say, okay, well, we got to get back to a beginning somewhere. And I think there are plenty, for me, I meant to say this at the end of the last comment, which is we've been talking about the scientific defenses, but as Than raised the issue of the philosophical defenses or arguments, that's where I think this kind of thing really sings, at least when we were talking about cosmology. I think it really sings there because I just find the arguments against an infinite past to be extremely intuitive. Like, it just seems obviously true to me. And after looking at it for 15 years, I still think it seems. Yeah. And it's not that I'm unaware of the responses to those things. It's just that how compelling are they to me? And I still find the force of that.
Yeah. A lot of people like to knock on the argument from traversing in an actual infinite. And I don't find the objections to it very, very compelling at all. So I'm with you there, Braxton. All right, guys. I got probably like another 10-15 minutes until I got to go take care of the kids for a little bit. So why isn't this there it is. Okay.
All the arguments that I make in the book are provisional based on the best science that we have.
Right.
And that's all we can do as scientists and philosophers of science. Okay. We're not,
but we're looking at a very limited amount of data that we can acquire from things that are 13.9 billion light years away. Right.
Sure. But it is striking how decisive the indicators are of a beginning based on what we're discovering. And James Webb has only reinforced that. And there's kind of a long story there. I'll try to make it short.
Can we pause you?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have to pee. Okay, so we'll come back. James Webb.
James Webb. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Condense my thoughts. I'll give you a shorter answer.
Sorry, we're back. I didn't even make it for an hour.
No
so
worries.
James Webb. James Webb Telescope. This episode is brought to you by Select Blinds. These days, there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence and how it can decide everything for us, but some things you're better off choosing for yourself, like your living space. With Select Blinds, you have the power to choose affordable, easy-to-install window treatments.
We're shilling for Select, whatever that is.
Right? I'll just take it down for a little bit. You don't get free advertisements on my channel. I'm listening to it still. Oh my goodness.
I want to say that Meyer is like, so, a lot of people don't like him for a number of different reasons, but as far as someone that can talk and sound really, really smart and like talk about a whole bunch of different things, he's like the perfect guest in that regard for being on Rogan, who just like, interviews whoever, just you could say really big words and talk a lot. It's really funny.
Zach, another good point on those same lines is he can be a real punching bag and just deal with it. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the famous discussion or debate that he had with Lawrence Krauss, where Lawrence Krauss basically got up there and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically I won't paraphrase. I'll just say he was very derisive and pejorative toward Stephen Meyer and the whole enterprise of intelligent design and all that. And then Stephen Meyer has has a problem speaking. He loses his voice or something. And then after that, Lawrence Krauss has to come up and help him fix his computer after he just lambasted him. It's kind of a really awkward moment at the beginning of that debate. What's Stephen Meyer do? Just keeps on trucking.
Yeah.
That's funny.
That's
all
awesome.
Right. We got through the ads.
James Webb.
Yeah, there's been a lot of media reports suggesting that the findings of the James Webb Telescope have undermined the case for the Big Bang or the Big Bang Theory. But there's an interesting backstory on this. Most of these media reports were based on the writings of a single physics researcher named Eric Lerner, who's been, since 1990, kind of carrying a torch.
Yeah.
We can almost skip forward like 5 minutes because he spends 5 minutes saying this guy kind of had his own agenda and he misquoted the scientist.
Okay. Start here.
And George Ellis proved in the 1960s and 70s. And then there's something called the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem.
He's talking about two other theories that lead towards the beginning besides the Big Bang.
Okay.
Vilenkin theorem, which I think is even a tighter physics proof of a beginning. I think there is a loophole with the Hawking-Penrose Ellis singularity theorem, although it's I think very suggestive and highly indicative of a beginning. I mean, let me run it just briefly because it's a fun thing to think about. So Hawking is doing black hole physics for his PhD in the 1960s, and he's at Cambridge and he's having these neurological symptoms, and he's diagnosed with ALS. He gets very, very discouraged. He thinks he's going to quit, and he's encouraged to press on by close friends, and he does. And he ends up writing this brilliant thesis where he has one chapter where he's thinking about what the cosmologists are talking about, is that we've got this expanding universe, and if the universe is expanding in the forward direction of time, then matter is getting more and more diffuse over time. Now, part of his thesis involves general relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity. And according to Einstein, a massive body actually curves the fabric of space or space-time. So if you're going in the forward direction of time, space is getting less and less curved, and matter more and more diffuse. But if you're going in the reverse direction of time, the matter is getting more and more densely concentrated at every successive point in the finite past until, again, you reach a limiting case where the matter gets so densely concentrated that space gets so tightly curved that it can't get any more tightly curved. It can't get any more densely concentrated. And you move towards a point of infinite density and infinite curvature. You get to a limiting case. Now, infinite curvature corresponds to zero spatial volume. And so the picture of the origin of the universe that sort of intuitively flows from this is one where you get not just matter and energy arising, but space and time come into existence at that 0 point. And he presents this in his PhD thesis. The story of this is told really nicely in the little film, the Theory of Everything. And he's fear and trepidation, getting examined, but one of his examiner, they're nitpicking all these different things, but then they say, hey, the idea of a black hole at the beginning of the universe, a space-time singularity, this is brilliant, congratulations, Dr. Hawking, and they shove the thesis book back over to him, and he's passed. But one of them says, now go work out the maths. And he ends up working out the math of this intuitive proof that he develops with Sir Roger Penrose, with whom you have done a wonderful interview, and George Ellis, whom I've had the occasion to meet. And so they end up producing several of these singularity theorems, suggesting that if general relativity is true, then there must have been a beginning. This is on grounds independent of all the things from observational astronomy. Now, there's a loophole with that, and that is that in the very tiniest smidgens of space-time, inside 10 to the minus 43rd of a second, or what they call Planck time, quantum effects might have been such that we would have to alter our ideas of how gravity worked. And so out of that has come something called an impulse, or different theories of what are called quantum gravity or quantum cosmology. And I think you've had some conversations on the show about that as well.
Sure.
In my book, I show that that is another possible cosmological model. But like the conclusion that the universe had a definite beginning, I think those models also have theistic implications, and I can explain why.
Okay.
Maybe we bracket that.
Okay.
Then there's yet a third proof, though, of a beginning by three physicists, Borde, Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin. And it's not based on general relativity. It's not based on ideas of what gravity was like in the early universe, but based on ideas of special relativity. It's a little tricky to explain easily, but basically they show that there is, again, a limiting case, and therefore a definite beginning to time. And therefore, and that it does not have the same loophole that the singularity theorems of Hawking and Penrose. So what I've said what I argue in the book is that a body of evidence from observational astronomy, a strong indicator from theoretical physics, namely the singularity theorems of Hawking et al., and then a very compelling proof from Borde, Guth, and Vilenkin all point to the same conclusion, that as best we can tell, the universe had a beginning. And I think that's the best we can do in science, but that is a pretty weighty range of testimony supporting the same conclusion.
Did you ever read any Terence McKenna?
I haven't.
Terence McKenna had a very funny thing that he said about science. He said, science wants you to believe that it's all about measurement and reason if you allow them one miracle. That one miracle.
That's a funny quote.
It's actually a good stopping point too, because they do get into more stuff. And if you want to just kind of have a conversation before we,
yeah, we can talk in an audience. If you have any questions, you can ask your questions in the chat, and then I'll pull them up while we start talking this stuff. So, who's got something to say? What's going on here?
Just to reiterate what he was talking about, when you get everything down to like Planck time and Planck space, and it's the smallest thing we can fathom, and then our laws of measurement, or we can't measure from there. There's a point in the universe after it begins expanding where almost everything is radiation, or I'm sorry, plasma. Plasma is like the number one element of the cosmos. And if you're going to talk about the cosmos at all, it's got to be in terms of plasma. And now, all these years later, plasma is hardly a factor. But for the longest time, plasma was everything. And so it makes me wonder if there wasn't something like plasma before Planck time and Planck space, or underneath, if time and space is all we can think of, if there's some other type of foundational existence other than time and space, where it was something like that. And aliens watching us would be like, man, that's everything. And then when time and space and physical laws come into play, then whatever that is fades away. And I realize this is a faithy statement, but I'm a faithist atheist. But if the universe does that sometimes, if the rules change and the components change, then I don't think it's impossible that there could have been that kind of existence that's in a different dimension or a different level of reality than what we understand.
Gotcha. Zach, Braxton?
I was just going to read this quote from Hawking about it, because he's just talking about Hawking. Because gravity shapes space and time, it allows space-time to be locally stable but globally unstable. On the scale of the entire universe, the positive energy of the matter can be balanced by the negative gravitational energy. And so there is no restriction on the creation of whole universes. Because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing in the manner described in chapter 6 of this book. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing. Why the universe exists, why we exist. It is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue torch and set the universe going. So, when you were just kind of talking about what you imagined that this early stage of the universe might look like, Richard, and when I look at, first of all, one of the things that always gets pointed out in these sorts of discussions is when we're talking about the singularity, and we're really talking about a big stretch, right? When we say the Big Bang, we're talking about a big stretch of space-time, is that right? Is that how we describe that space? You're stretching space basically out.
Right. Yeah. Space-time is one fabric, and then it's expanding out, and then you have the introduction of energy, and some of that energy cools into matter, and then you have physical laws.
Mm-hmm. So again, this is the sciencey stuff. I had something I was going to say about this, and that's just basically the caveat that always gets made, that when we're talking about nothing, are we really talking about nothing when we're talking about a balance of positive and negative energy in space where that's happening in, and all that sort of thing. But that's beyond that. I'm not sure the point we would want to make with this. He's just making the point that you retract everything backwards, like on a tape recorder or whatever. It all goes down to a single point. And I guess he's making the point here, Richard, that I'm asking you because I'm trying to figure out what's the point he's trying to make, that this points to a beginning. I guess that's it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's saying if matter and energy and the physical laws and space-time are all we know, then that's what makes sense. And I'm just saying, okay, that's all we know, but what if that's only like a fraction of what reality really is? And so we only think
you're saying, what if there's other, like if the laws change, I think you said.
Right, there's different laws, and there's different stuff. There's just different kinds of existence, but our brains can only fathom what we grew up in, and so even our philosophy is affected by this, so that we can't think outside of cause and effect. What if cause and effect is just a recent thing?
Mm-hmm.
The only thing
Zach?
I want to add is that Meyer is just like so committed to finishing his arguments, and he's like so committed to giving all these different arguments. So like sometimes he'll answer questions that Rogan doesn't ask, and it's like, yeah, your chance to be on the millions of viewers, and you're giving all the arguments for God. Yeah.
Amen.
It's funny. Somebody in the audience.
So what?
Somebody,
so Richard, what would you say is the reason, or what reason do we have to believe those kind of things? You may have some that I'm not aware of.
Mostly
like
I'm just
like there's no cause, like the cause and effect is recent or something.
Mostly I'm playing devil's advocate, because I try to be critical thinking, for everything. So if I say, how do I know that? And I get back to that point, and it says, okay, so now there's matter and energy and the space-time, but was there nothing there, or could there have been something else? And then when I think about that thing about the plasma, how the universe was mostly plasma for a while, and then now it's not a factor at all, I'm thinking, what if what if it's usually like that? What if reality changes so much that new rules come into play for whatever reason? You can still say there's an agency behind all that. That stuff really doesn't bother me. That whether there's an agency behind it or not, if I were to find out that there was an agency, aliens or a deity.
Let's take God out of it for a second. Somebody will clip that out, but let's take God out of it for a second, and let's just focus on what you're trying to say. Are you just kind of speculating? Maybe we're so sort of provincially thinking about the way things are right here and now for us that maybe we go. Does that? So it's just a speculation.
It's a speculation, and then it's also sort of a warning or caution too, because if things do change, then then reality could change again, and people are kind of stuck on the way they were thinking. So it's also kind of a warning.
But now putting God back into the equation, you might say it could serve as some kind of a defeater to something that God would have had to do or something.
I don't know if it's a defeater or not, because I'm for an atheist, I'm kind of okay with a deity or a God existing. I don't think that would break me to discover that God exists. I would just, at that point, I'd be confused. Like, what were you trying to do? What was your rules? And then he could tell me, I'll tell you later, but the fact that he existed and was behind it wouldn't really freak me out that much. It's really just kind of a word of caution and just thinking, I'm also aware how our surroundings play such a big impact on how we think, that comes into play too. And maybe all this kind of affects how we think, so that we can't fathom anything else. And as you apologists like to say, is just because you can't think of it doesn't mean it's not true. So sure. I try to push that back a little bit.
Robert, Richard, couldn't you just say that, sure, we don't know that these, you're speculating, okay, so there's things we don't know about, but couldn't one say, hey, this is what the evidence points to, even though we know there's a lot we don't know, this is the evidence we point to? Do you disagree or not disagree with that statement?
I'm perfectly okay with that. Yeah, in fact, Stephen Meyer says, this is just where the trend lines are right now, and this is all provisional, and more data could come in, and we should be open to that. When he gives those caveats, then I'm good. That's all I'm trying to say as well. Where I get into problems sometimes is I'll have an apologist say, I understand you're worried about your sinful life and you're scared of accountability, so you're trying to get around the beginning, but please, let's just focus on the facts. And I'm like, okay, but I mean, I'm in my 50s. I have a family. I don't know, how much more of a sinful life I've got in me, but it could also be that I'm just trying to be open-minded and that I'm not trying to avoid a beginning. Plus, no beginning changes nothing. There's still theistic implications in an eternal universe. So
yeah.
I'll try to.
You're a real odd bird to me, Richard. Obviously, we all know that, but beyond just the fact that you are the way you are, and that's odd, but the fact that typically when I run into someone who's got the disposition that you have, and at your age, that they become Christians. It's an odd thing. And I'm not talking about, this is not a statement like some atheists will make. Well, this guy's really smart, he'll be an atheist soon. I'm not saying that. I'm saying this guy acts like every deacon in a Baptist church I've ever been to. Why isn't he a Christian?
I was raised Southern Baptist. I was Southern Baptist for the first, 17 to 20 years of my life.
Yeah.
So I've got that. And then I just agree with people like Jordan Peterson that says you do believe in something. You do think something's important, even if you're wrong about that. And there's no problem living as if you really should do that. So I give my kids lunch at lunchtime. Do I have to? Does it mean anything in the future? I don't know, but I'm going to give them lunch. I think it's important, so I do it. I don't necessarily think that proves God, but if a theist says, no, the reason why you love your kids is because of God, then I'm like, okay, maybe so. But meanwhile, I'm still gonna, still give them lunch.
Yeah. Cool, guys. Well, we got two little things I want to bring up. Was one, Cosmo apparently saw the thing I was hoping nobody noticed, and I'll just kind of make it known now. Is there's in a whole entire stream. If you look down here, Minecraft launchers up, and I was really hoping nobody would see that. But Cosmo did. So, Than, is Minecraft evidence for God? Yes. A game that is as great as Minecraft He's much more expected on the condition that theism is true than atheism.
That's pretty compelling, actually.
I
okay.
actually think it is. I think it's like when there used to be this person, I forget her name, Jacqueline Glenn. You guys know Jacqueline Glenn?
Yeah.
Is that
Oh,
Jocelyn Glenn. Yeah.
She
Yeah.
made a video once talking about how Christians think everything's evidence for God. She's like, "Do you think that my defecating dog is evidence for God?" And I was like, "Absolutely. Let's talk about your defecating dog."
Jeez. That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, B time seems to shoot cause and effect in the foot. I did want to address that too, just because I don't think that's true. Even though I don't hold the B theory of time, I'm a presentist. I do think that there are models of cause and effect that are compatible and plausible on the B theory of time. Philosophers to look at with this are like Andrew Locke. His version of the Kalam is compatible with a B theory of time. The only thing is just that you're going to have different views of time on that effect, and you're going to have to parse out what cause and effect is differently than somebody like Craig would in his Kalam. So Andrew Locke is really good on this topic. If anybody else has anything to say on that.
I don't.
I would just say about it that cause and effect, like with the B theory, I'm imagining that the criticism here, or the suggestion here, is that because all points on the time block are equally real, then the cause and effect becomes a moot point or something. Is that what we're? Is that what we're saying?
Well, so it depends on how you kind of parse these things out, because the way Locke will describe cause and effect here is going to be like, hey, like time is a description of later than and earlier than entities, and something might cause something else, like a cause might have effect E, if and only if it has this place on the timeline, kind of a thing. Because if you don't have those entities there, then no cause and effect is actually still happening, regardless of theory of time that you're on. So again, I recommend reading Locke there. It's been a while since I've looked at that particular topic. So
Tim Stratton's got an argument to this effect that has to do with the B theory. He doesn't affirm the B theory, and he's talking about how it shoots down any meaningful sense of evolution actually happening, because the full, the man is equally real at the same, not at the same time. You can't say that, but just as the single-celled organism is real. And he goes into it there because this is the way I thought you were going with it, is basically the idea that, look, if 1945 is real and 2132 is real, and they're both real, then what is the relationship between those or any two points on the timeline in terms of cause and effect?
Yeah. He said, okay, he also said, well, do I love a Kalam that works with B theory? I have a debate with an atheist named Mike Burgandy, and it's posted on my YouTube, on my channel. If you look at that, I do propose I use a Kalam that's compatible with B theory because my opponent was a B theorist. So it's on there.
And I think there's a version of the Grim Reaper paradox that would work on B theory in terms of space. But go ahead.
Yeah. So again, yeah, look at Locke on that. But I would also just say that A theory is true.
I agree.
So yeah. Anything else, guys, before I close this out here?
I've brought up everything I wanted to say. I don't have any closing thoughts this time.
I came in with nothing to say, and most of what I've tried to do is figure out what's being said and assess it through Richard. So
fair enough.
Iron sharpening iron, except he's
Zach.
not being sharpened. I'm just being sharpened.
Yeah, have fun. Go check out the other channels.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm definitely going to watch your show more now, Zach. I saw it,
Cool.
not knowing it was you, but I'll watch it more now.
Yeah,
Sweet.
Zach's great. Zach, do me a favor. Send me a bio that I can copy and paste into the description with all your links and stuff too. Because we decided to bring you on like very last second, so I couldn't do anything like that.
Yeah, change the thumbnail too. Gosh.
Send me a picture. I'm gonna crop your face though and put you on top of like a storm deity fighting Leviathan.
Nice.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you everybody for listening. Until next time, God bless.
See you guys.